This episode of Gather and Go is sponsored by Colette, a leader in group travel since 1918. With more than 170 expertly curated tours and 5 distinct travel styles, from small groups to cruising and beyond, there's a tour to fit your group's unique needs. Plus, Colette makes it easy to set up and manage your group travel program, providing you with local support, marketing materials, self-service tools, and more. Colette handles every detail with tours that are led by local experts who are with you the entire journey, meaning your group just has to pack their bags and go. Learn more at gocolette.com/groups. Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to Gather and Go, the podcast that helps you plan, promote, and lead better trips. I'm Brian Jewell. I am your host. I am thrilled that you decided to join me today. And as always, we're going to do everything we can to make that investment of your time worth your while. Now, today, I'm excited to bring you a really informative conversation with Colleen McDaniel, who is the editor-in-chief of Cruise Critic. Colleen and I are going to spend the entire episode talking about river cruising. You're going to hear her take on why river cruising is growing in popularity. She's going to give you tips on picking the river cruise experience that's right for you or your group. And she's going to tell us about some interesting new opportunities specifically for groups in the river cruise space. Colleen is great, a source of so much knowledge in the cruise industry. I can't wait for you to hear from her. First, though, let's get into some travel news you may have missed. Hawaii is raising tourism taxes in response to climate change. The Hawaii legislature recently passed a bill to increase the state government's portion of the transient accommodations tax, with the aim of mitigating the effects of climate change. The legislation will increase the state's accommodation tax from 10.25% to 11% beginning in January. It also authorizes counties in the state to increase their portion of the tax by up to 3%. The bill also requires that cruise ship passengers pay the accommodations tax, which they have not been subject to until now. The text of the bill specifically cites climate change as a reason for the increase. Hawaii Governor Josh Green, who has said he intends to sign the bill into law, said the increased funding is necessary to mitigate wildfire risks he attributed to climate change, and praised the legislation as a, quote, new standard in addressing the climate crisis. Critics of the bill, however, say the climate change affects everyone across the state, not just those who work in tourism, and that it's unfair to target tourism specifically to fund climate-focused actions. Well, now it's time for the road tip segment of our show. This is the portion of every episode where we reach deep into our bag of travel knowledge from decades on the road and bring you tips to make your next trip less stressful and more successful. Now, I can't tell you how many people I have met over the years who, when we get to talking about travel, they make some comment along the lines of, I never sleep well in a hotel room. Now, I understand that sentiment. I have certainly been there myself. And, there's no silver bullets for sleeping in a hotel. You're in a bed that's not your own bed. You're in a room that's not your own bedroom. There's all kinds of exciting things or unusual things happening around you. Of course, it's understandable that you don't fall asleep as easily as you do at home. However, I have found over the years that there are some things you can do to make the situation a little bit better. One of the things that I think makes it difficult to fall asleep in a hotel is there's generally a lot more light or lights in a hotel room than the room you sleep in at home. I'm talking about light streaming in under the hotel door from the hallway. I'm talking about little blinking lights on the air conditioning unit, on the refrigerator, the microwave, the TV in front of you. It's not uncommon for me to turn off the lights in a hotel room only to discover, once I'm already in bed, that there are 4 or 5 little annoying tiny blinking lights around me in the room. Now, that kind of thing really gets into my head and makes it hard for me to sleep. So over the past couple of years, I have been sort of taking matters into my own hands to eliminate some of those blinking lights, that ambient light coming in from under the door. And I found that it actually makes a difference in how I sleep. So for today's road tip, I'm going to give you a few of the things that I do to minimize those blinking and ambient lights when I'm trying to sleep, and one or two other tips that I have found from across the web that you might find helpful. The main thing I do is I try to use whatever I can find at my disposal to cover up those blinking lights in the room. Now, if it's something like the microwave that I know I'm not going to use while I'm there, I may just unplug it. Same might go for the TV or some other appliance that isn't relevant to me. But if you can't easily reach the plug, or you don't want to unplug an appliance or something like that, look for things around the room that you could use to cover up that light. It might be a throw pillow from a couch or a chair there in the room that you could just prop up on the desk or the countertop in front of, say, the TV, and the little status light gets covered up by it. It might be one of those little placards that they put in rooms to say things like no smoking, or if you'd like to reuse your towels, you can help us save water. Those things can be really convenient to just stick right in front of one of those blinking lights. Sometimes I have used things I have on hand. I put my backpack in front of it, take out a notebook, use one of those little guidebooks that they leave on the coffee table that is a guide to the surrounding city or something like that. Prop that up in front of whatever is emitting the light, and it usually makes a really big difference. Now, if you don't want to be searching around the hotel room when it's time to go to bed looking for something on hand that you can use to cover up a blinking light, you could do what other people online have recommended, which is travel with a small roll of electrical tape. Now, electrical tape tends to be thick, black, plasticky, opaque tape. It sticks well to things, but doesn't adhere so tightly that it's difficult to remove. And the rolls are pretty small and compact. So you could bring a roll of electrical tape in your carry-on. And when it's time for bed, if you see a flashing light that's going to get on your nerves, simply pull off some of that electrical tape, cover over the light, and then you can remove it when it's time for you to check out of the room, so you haven't done any damage to the room or its fixtures. Now, when it comes to dealing with that ambient light that can seep underneath the hotel door, electrical tape's not going to help you with that, but what can help you is a towel. That's right, just grab a bath towel from the hotel bathroom, roll it up lengthwise, and then stuff it a little bit under the door or place it right in front of the door. That's usually enough to block that ambient light out so that you get a nice, good, dark room that is helpful for sleeping. Finally, one last tip, and I've shared this one on the show before. If you have curtains in your hotel room that don't quite join, they don't have a nice tight seal on their own, you might find that there's some ambient light getting through from outside, maybe a street light, something else, moonlight, anything coming from outside. That can also be a little bit difficult to deal with. So I always keep a chip clip, one of those spring-loaded clips that you would use to close a bag of chips. I always keep one of those in my carry-on, and most nights on the road, I use that chip clip to join one side of the curtains to the other side, make a nice tight seal so that no ambient light is getting in the room. With a nice dark room, the temperature set to a good level, I find it much easier to sleep so that I am well rested and ready for a great day on the road. That is your road tip of the week. Now, before we move on, I want to take just a minute and share a little bit of news from us. If you are new to the podcast or just getting to know our company, The Group Travel Leader, I want to tell you about one of our best resources, and it is absolutely free. This is the Group Travel Minute newsletter. And hey, I know what you're thinking, Brian, I already get so many newsletters. Are you really asking me to sign up for another one? Well, here's what I want you to know. Here are some reasons why you definitely should sign up for this newsletter. Number one, it only comes out twice a month. So we're not going to be in your email every day. We're not going to be stuffing your inbox with things that don't matter to you. Number two, this is a beautiful and easy to read newsletter. We recently redesigned it. It looks great. It's got big, beautiful pictures, really clear headlines. It is not cluttered. It's very easy to sort of scan through and see exactly which content is most relevant to you. Another reason that you should read it is that it has the very best articles from our print magazines. So whether you subscribe to the Group Travel Leader in print or not, you can get all our best content by subscribing to the Group Travel Minute. In addition to those print articles, it also has some web exclusive content that you won't find anywhere in print. So if you like the information, the insights, the tips, the articles, the research that you get from us in print, you're going to want to subscribe online as well so that you don't miss some of that web exclusive content. Finally, you want to subscribe because that's where we put announcements about our new FAM tour opportunities when they come available. I got a hint for you. We have another one coming available soon for this fall. It's an exciting one. You're going to want to hear about it. So how do you get the Group Travel Minute? Well, you sign up free on our website at grouptravelleader.com/subscribe. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I hope you will check it out. Sign up. We would love to deliver the great content that we work on every day to your inbox twice a month in the Group Travel Minute. Well, it's just about time for us to move into our featured conversation with Colleen McDaniel. As we do, let me remind you, you can find a wrap-up of some of the most important things Colleen had to say, as well as links and resources to many of the different things that she has available on Cruise Critic, which is really the world's foremost independent source about information for cruises. You can find links to all of that in the show notes for this episode. Also, after the interview, I'm going to give a quick recap of some of the most important things that Colleen had to say and some of my thoughts and reactions to those. And I hope you'll stick around to the end of that recap, because after that, I want to return to this topic of tourism taxes, and specifically whether they are a viable solution for dealing with climate concerns. That's going to be the topic of today's Hot Minute. You won't want to miss that. We'll be right back with Colleen McDaniel. All right, everybody, I want to take a minute to tell you more about our sponsor, Colette. Colette's small group explorations are experience-fueled tours for the culturally curious. When your group embarks on a small group explorations tour, you have access to cultural connections that larger groups don't, like meeting with locals for lunch in Zimbabwe's Chinotimba Township and talking to a gaucho in Patagonia. Plus, Colette makes filling and promoting your tour easy. There's no deposit or minimum group size required, so your booking is totally risk-free. Colette also provides free marketing materials to help promote the tour to your community, including a local business development manager. Visit gocolette.com/groups to get started. All right, everybody. My guest today is a passionate cruiser who has traveled the world from Alaska, the Caribbean, and Hawaii to Europe, Africa, and Antarctica on ships of all shapes and sizes. She's the editor-in-chief of Cruise Critic, the world's largest online cruise resource, and has appeared in media outlets such as Good Morning America, the New York Times, and Travel and Leisure. Colleen McDaniel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it, Brian.
I'm so excited to have you here. It's always good to talk to a fellow travel journalist. And I imagine as editor-in-chief of Cruise Critic, you probably get the kind of comment that I get all the time at social events and cocktail parties. You must have the greatest job in the world.
Absolutely. That is a very common comment. And I got to say, yeah, it is a pretty great job. I've been a longtime journalist in multiple areas, and travel is a really great place right now. It's really exciting, and it's always changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And boy, do we deserve some exciting times in travel after what we went through 5 years ago. During the pandemic era. So river cruising is the topic of the show today. It seems to me, I've been in tourism a little over 20 years. It seems to me that river cruising has exploded in popularity over about the past 10 years, but I could be wrong. So I'm interested to hear your assessment. Is that kind of a fair timeline, or has it been kind of a slower buildup than that? And, people just didn't notice?
There was river cruising before the past 10 years, but I think it's absolutely an adequate statement to say that, yes, we have seen a ramp up in river cruising like you would not believe. It's been a virtual explosion, and it's really exciting to watch.
Yeah. What do you think is driving that?
Demand. Demand for river cruising certainly is driving a good part of that. The other thing that I think is driving that is that there is interest in a cruise line that really fits you, that really fits your personality. And in the beginning, there were only a handful of river cruise lines that were out there doing it. And now, there are a lot of river cruise lines out there, and each of them offers their own experience. So you can really find that river cruise line, that river cruise ship that is right for you.
I know that this is a question that may be impossible to answer, but can you give us sort of a high level view of what the general price range is? Let's say for that 7 day to 10 day excursion, what are you looking at from a budget line versus what are you looking at from one of these luxury lines?
Right. You're going to start at about $3,000 per person for that standard river cruise experience. And most river lines, that includes your obviously your food,
Mhm.
some food and drink, or excuse me, some beverage. It might include Wi-Fi. It might include a shore excursion, that kind of thing. But that's pretty standard. There are going to be some that are slightly less expensive and some that are slightly more. And then, of course, seasonality plays into it as well. So if you are somebody who wants to go on a early spring river cruise, well, you probably are going to pay a little bit less for that than you might pay for middle of the summer peak season river cruise.
Yeah, that makes sense. My experience, and it's limited, my experience in cruising is limited, but my experience has been that the dining specifically on board a river cruise is a pretty different experience than dining aboard an ocean liner. Does that hold up with what you've seen?
Yeah, it does. And I will say that if you are an ocean cruiser, you think you're familiar with cruising. You are.
Mhm.
You're familiar with the ocean cruise, but the river cruise experience overall is just different. It's more casual, whereas you might have several thousand passengers on board a big ocean cruise. On a river cruise, you're going to have fewer than 200 people. So everything is more casual. When it comes to dining, it's open seat dining and you can go and, sit wherever you'd like. You can change it up every night. People, I think, tend to sort of make fast friends and stay with those groups. But it is a very different experience. There is less option, which is not a bad thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's you have fewer options because there are just fewer people, but they're really wonderful. And River Cruise Lines do a terrific job of trying to make sure that their dishes are representative of the area they're going. So if you're going to go to Vienna, you're going to have Wiener Schnitzel,
Right.
that kind of thing. So it's really pegged to the destination.
And there's a much higher likelihood too that the ingredients for that dinner may have been bought in port that day in the same village you've been exploring, rather than on an ocean liner they had to pack that in your destination in your origin port and carry it at sea for a few days, right?
That's right. Yeah, they can provision pretty much anywhere because they're never far from land.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say that for many people taking ocean cruises, the cruise liner itself is sort of the marquee attraction? Versus a river cruise, you're going to see the destination and the cruise is just your method of transport.
That's a very true statement, especially as we're seeing on the ocean, some of these really big cruise ships coming out where they are just loaded with things to do. And some people will make the cruise ship their destination. On a river cruise ship, you want to be comfortable, you want to have great service, you want to have great food. But it's not so important that this is the perfect experience for you. They have beautiful ships.
Yeah.
But the reason you're there is you want to explore, you want to see some of the major capitals of the world, you want to see wine regions. That's what river cruising is about.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So the first time I remember being on a river cruise vessel, probably about 15 years ago, my impression of my fellow passengers and also my impression from people I talked to in the industry was that this was a pretty dialed in demographic. We were talking 55 plus. We were talking relatively high annual income, relatively high level of education. Is that still the case, or are the demographics and spending patterns and things really changing and opening up?
I think the demographics are changing. It does tend to be an older crowd, in part because some of the cruises are longer.
Hmm.
Getting over to Europe from the United States, that's a journey. And for younger people, they might not have the time to get away, either because their job doesn't offer them significant amount of vacation time, or they've got young families and arranging that is difficult. Whereas people who traditionally have river cruised often are retired.
Yeah.
So they have time, they've saved the money. This is the kind of thing they planned to do in their retirement. But
Mm.
more and more, we are seeing younger cruisers on board all the ships in that are sailing Europe. And part of that reason is because I think the pandemic changed how people thought about travel. Something that was, hey, someday became, hey, let's do it this year. Another reason is because internet has gotten a lot better. And this sounds like a small
Mm.
thing, but for younger people where like getting away from work is really tough, all of a sudden working on a river cruise ship is doable. And
Wow.
so they're able to have that, that bleisure vacation where they're
Yeah.
blending that work trip with their vacation. And I think that makes a difference. We are also seeing some cruise lines. AMA is a good example of this. That really are aiming for families,
Mm.
which is not every cruise line does that. Viking, for example, has a minimum age of 18.
Yeah.
But AMA is really opening it up and trying to get families on board. They've partnered with Adventures by Disney. They have connecting cabins, which is unusual in river. And so that's another option. And then finally, one of the things we're seeing, especially in the past couple of years, are themed river cruises. And
Mm.
these have been around for a while, but they're really seeking interesting demographics. So, for example, there's a women's only cruise on Uniworld, which is
Yeah.
terrific. And there are more and more of these kind of journeys that are designed to bring people together who have similar interests and similar backgrounds.
Yeah. So that affinity grouping may be drawing people into river cruises who wouldn't normally be looking for that experience just as their normal vacation.
Correct.
Yeah, that's really cool. So a lot of our listeners operate land tours. They are, experienced taking people on land through Europe, around the world. If they have not done a river cruise before, how would you compare that experience, let's say in Europe, to the land cruise in Europe, where you might see a lot of the same places? What's the argument for doing it via river cruise, via motor coaches and hotels?
Yeah. So my favorite argument is you only have to unpack once when you're on a cruise.
That's a big
And
one.
so you get on board the ship, you unpack once, and the ship takes you to the destinations versus trains, buses, et cetera, where you're staying in a hotel for a night or two, repacking, going to the next location and doing it all over again. So that is a huge advantage to it. Also, unlike ocean cruising, where, it might take a day or two to get from one destination to the other. On a river cruise, you're never too far from a really interesting destination. And
Yeah.
so you are spending a ton of time in port, and it'll feel like the same kind of things you're getting from those land experiences, but you're doing it from the comfort of a cruise ship.
So there has been so much activity in the river cruise space. It seems like once a month I'm getting news about somebody who's expanding or somebody new who's coming into the space. Big news earlier this year, Celebrity announced that they are going to be launching like 7, I think, river cruise vessels in the next year or two. I'm curious how you read the market. What does this say about the market that there are so many expansions and new companies coming in? Uh, is the market big enough to support that? Is there enough demand to support this growing supply?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And I think the advance of Celebrity into the river cruise space shows that there's demand because
Hmm.
a cruise line like Celebrity, which is owned by Royal Caribbean Group, they're not going to just casually come into a space that they're not certain there is opportunity for.
Hmm.
So the opportunity continues to grow. And as these cruise lines continue to differentiate, I think that's what keeps people coming back is they can say,
Hmm.
boy, I've really enjoyed my time on Tauk, or gosh, I loved the upscale luxury of Uniworld. I really want to come back and do it over and over again. And they're Uniworld people or they're Avalon people or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That differentiation makes a difference. And where Celebrity has an advantage is they are a longtime ocean cruise name. So they've got a built-in audience already that says, hey, I love Celebrity. I trust Celebrity. I'm going to try river cruising with Celebrity.
Yeah. Do you think a large portion of their river cruise market is going to be people who already have an affinity for their brand on the oceans, or do you think they're going to peel away, some customers from some of these other lines?
I think it's gonna be a little of both, but I imagine in the beginning, it's likely to be the more loyal guests. As a matter of fact, I think they're kind of banking on that because they heard from their guests that, "Gosh, I'm considering a river cruise," and celebrities thinking, "Well, instead of sending them on another line, let's just make river ships for them."
Yeah, it makes sense. I hope it works out well for them. So another question on my mind, and not to take a negative turn here, but can Europe's rivers support this growth? From a sustainability point of view, just from a local life in some of these towns and villages. I already hear stories in some places of people having to cross 2 or 3 other river cruise vessels to get from their boats to land. So can growth keep up this way without causing trouble with the locals?
Yeah, so far we're seeing that, right? We're seeing that the growth absolutely can keep up with the demand. Yes, this is not unusual where you have to cross another river cruise ship to get to shore. This is just part of river cruising and has been for a long time. There are only so many docks. So
Right.
often river cruise ships will dock side by side. What's fun is if you're like me and you love ships, you get to take a peek around whatever ship you're walking through, which is
Yeah.
terrific. Yeah. And we are continuing to see, the destination is expand. Sure, if you're in the Danube, you're going to do Budapest, you're going
Mhm.
to do Vienna, but we're seeing further expansion, say into the more southern part of the Danube River, and there are always cruise lines that are adding smaller ports to their itineraries so people get a chance to really see different parts of the rivers, and it also takes away from some of the congestion in the bigger ports.
Yeah. I do think of Amsterdam that kind of made some news by moving its cruise port. Some people didn't like that move, say it's much less convenient. Do you think there's a chance that other sort of European capitals might make similar moves if too much more traffic continues to build?
It really does depend on the port, and the European capital, but these ports are, dependent in some cases
Mm.
on tourism, and let's be honest, it's 200 people at a time.
Mhm.
Even if you had, 5 ships in port and 1,000 people are walking off, your city can still support that. It's
Yeah.
not like a big cruise ship, that comes with 3, 4, 5,000 people where there has to be some consideration to, scheduling concerns and that kind of thing. But with river cruising, the ships are small,
Yeah.
and so it's not a huge disruption. And in most cases, it takes you to sort of the city center. So if you are visiting Budapest, you are going to get off the ship right in the heart of the city and right in the heart of kind of the tourist area as well.
Yeah.
So it is set up to support that.
Yeah, well, that's good news. So I remember a few years ago reading a lot, especially one summer, about water levels being not ideal for cruising to the point where it was unsafe to try to navigate certain stretches of river with river cruise vessels, and it pushed a lot of itineraries basically onto land. And some people are saying, well, I just ended up, I paid for a river cruise. I ended up doing a land tour, more or less. Um, have those issues more or less been resolved? Is it an ongoing problem? Does it really just depend on weather? What's the status of that?
Yeah, it 100% depends on weather. You can't guarantee that you're going to have the water levels you need to sail, and it absolutely can be an issue. A couple of things can happen, right? Not enough water, and the ship just can't. It can't go.
Yeah.
Too much water, and ships don't fit underneath the bridges, so they really can't get from one place to the next. So when that happens, what often happens, especially with cruise lines that have a number of ships in their fleet, is you might start off on one ship and it sails as far as it can
Hmm.
safely. And then you'll get on a different ship that's at a different point in the river and potentially sail that other part of the river
Mm.
as you can. So it's not unusual for it to happen. It usually happens in the summer. It's not necessarily something we tend to see in other times. So if you really want to make sure that, hey, I don't want to have water levels affect my trip, book shoulder seasons, book spring, book fall. It's not a guarantee, but the weather does tend to be a bit better at that time of year.
Yeah, that makes sense. How do the lines usually handle it when they know they're going to have to, deviate from the itinerary? Do they give people an out, Or is it pretty much, well, you knew the risk when you signed up, and so we're still going to count on you to be here?
Yeah, they tend not to give people that out, mostly because it changes day to day, right? And so
Yeah.
they don't tend to make a call on how they're going to cruise. I'll give an example. I was on a river cruise, and I was supposed to be on one ship. I showed up and we're looking for my ship. It wasn't there. And they
Oh,
had communicated, but really it was early in the morning, that no, it's now going to be on this ship. And so, same ship, same layout, which is one of the things about the river cruise lines. Like, all of Viking's long ships are laid out exactly the same.
yeah.
So, I had the same cabin number just on a different ship. And it ended up being a pretty good experience. But you don't tend to get a lot of lead time on things like that because weather can change, and it does.
Yeah.
So, it tends to be, most people are going to say, yeah, it wasn't maybe the river cruise I thought it was, but I still had an amazing time. I still enjoyed my time on board. But there's probably going to be a little more busing.
Yeah. So one big rainfall
One
could
big
affect.
rainfall, yeah, or one really hot day.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's wild. And that's one of those things we don't think about on land tours, right? I mean,
Right.
you prepare for the weather you're going to encounter that day, but it's not going to impact your itinerary. So another development in the last 10 or 15 years to me seems that the exotics have really come into their own in terms of being cruise destinations. And of course, we use exotic in the most general term there, basically destinations outside North America and Europe. How does the experience on a river cruise in the Nile, the Amazon, the Mekong, some of these other destinations, how does it really stack up and compare to what people might be used to on that Danube cruise?
Well, it is, it's a fully different experience, to do some of these more far-flung destinations. Um, the river ships tend to be smaller. For
Mm,
example, on the Mekong, you're gonna have fewer than 50 people on your
wow.
ship.
Wow.
And the Nile is, also a smaller ship experience. And so it is it feels different. It feels more intimate. The other thing that you'll find with many of these is the crew is going to be from the area that you're sailing. So if you're sailing, the Mekong, you're going to have crew on board from Cambodia and you're going to have crew on board from Vietnam.
Yeah.
You'll have guides from both those places, and you'll have a Cambodian guide lead your section probably when you're in Cambodia, and then when you get to Vietnam, if that's the direction you're sailing, you'll have your Vietnamese guide, be leading you. And so it's an interesting piece of it. It's definitely more intimate.
Mm,
You really get to know your fellow guests. I've done a few of these kinds of cruises, and I always come away with friends.
mm,
You make friends on these cruises. You keep up with each other after they're over. It's a unique shared experience. On the Mekong in Cambodia, you're not visiting the big city capitals.
mm.
Your boat will pull off into a village
Wow.
where the only thing that kind of indicates it's a village are, the people that are there to greet you. And then you might, see some people, working and that kind of thing, but it doesn't scream city the way,
Right.
Vienna does.
Yeah.
I've always found that, on these kinds of trips, you come away feeling like you've done something really special. In Egypt, for example, I mean, of course, you're going to spend time in Cairo. You're going to see some of the most incredible sights. You're gonna visit the temples. It is an amazing experience. And, on an Egyptian cruise, you'll have an Egyptologist on board,
Mm,
and a lot of what you're doing is learning about Egypt and its culture and its history, and it's fascinating. So it is a more immersive experience that way, and I would encourage anybody who's thinking about it to do it, because to me it is a special kind of cruising.
yeah. Well, I'm sold. Yeah. You sold me at least for sure. So on the other end of the spectrum, there is river cruising in the US. For whatever reason, it does not have the same kind of buzz that European river cruising and other destinations do. Do you see that changing at all? Or is it always going to be just a kind of small niche thing that appeals to only a few people here?
Uh, You know, um, The Mississippi River is sort of what everybody thinks of when they think of the U.S. river cruising, but there are a number of other rivers. A lot of tributaries to the Mississippi make up
Hmm.
part of those journeys. And of course, you can take cruises out west too on the Columbia and Snake Rivers.
Hmm.
These are actually beautiful itineraries. The audience for these tend to be a little bit older,
Mm.
even than European river cruising, because these are people who've said, "Hey, I really want to explore the United States in a different way." And there's, for example, a full Mississippi River cruise that will either take you from Minnesota down to New Orleans or vice
Hmm.
versa. And for a lot of people, getting to know Middle America and the South and the Midwest is something really exciting and interesting. And so these trips tend to sell pretty well. They tend to be a little pricier than even some of the river cruises in Europe are, but there is an audience for it. I feel like it's right sized right
Mm.
now, but I also believe that there is room for growth as more and more people really come to understand what that option is like.
Yeah. Wow. That's good to know. So, a lot of our listeners are planning travel for groups. So, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how feasible it is to book a group of 10, 20, maybe more than 20 people onto one of these popular river cruise vessels. That sometimes I hear that, they're so busy with FIT bookings, they don't need groups. But then I meet people from river lines who say, well, we'd love to talk to you about your group. So, in general, is there a way for groups to get into this market?
Yeah, there is a way. Again, when you talk about peak season, another peak season is the Christmas market season. And that
Mm.
really runs from November right up till about Christmas, comes off a little bit short. You're not going to get group travel on one of those cruises. Those sell out years in advance. But
Mm.
there is an opportunity. In other parts of the season. Again, take a look at peak season, plan ahead. There is a river cruise line that is coming out with its first new river ship called Transcend,
Mm.
and they are 100% only for charter groups.
Oh, wow.
So their model is full ship charter. And they've got business centers. They've got rooms that can adjust so you can combine two cabins or have
Mm.
one cabin. But it's really designed for charters and incentive groups, which is a really interesting model. And so they're breaking into that space. So that is a brand worth exploring if you're looking for a charter cruise.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Do you have a sense for how many cabins those charters are going to be?
I'm sorry, I don't. I should have looked that up
Oh,
before
that's
we
okay.
before we chatted today. But I think the point is it can change, right? So
Yeah.
if you're doing an incentive where, hey, you want your top seller to have the biggest room on board, they're all the same, but you can open up space between
Yeah.
them, I believe. So it's an interesting model, and I'm really excited to see how it works.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll be tracking that as well for sure. All right. So, what is the best way, Colleen, for people to take advantage of all your resources at Cruise Critic? Or also, if they want to follow you specifically, connect with you, give us all the ways to find you.
Wonderful. Well, you can always visit cruisecritic.com. We have articles, tips, ship reviews, anything you need to know about cruising. We also have a very active cruise forum, and many of the people on our cruise forum are more cruise expert than I am.
Mm.
They've been doing it for, 30, 40 years. So you can come chat with other cruisers, find out about, more details, ask specific questions. Of course, we're on social. On Instagram, we're Cruise Critic. And we're also on Facebook as Cruise Critic, so you can connect with us in either place. And of course, you can always reach out to me at editor@cruisecritic.com.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to drop links to all of those things in the show notes and definitely encourage our listeners to take advantage of those resources. Now, before I let you go, we have some just for fun questions we ask everybody. No pressure here. You can just give us the first answer that comes to mind. When you book travel, are you going to book a window seat or an aisle seat?
Oh, aisle
Yeah. What's
every
the
time.
reasoning there?
I want to be able to get up when I want to get up. I tend to be the kind of person, especially on long haul flights, who I'm going to find a hidden corner where I can maybe stretch a little bit,
Yeah.
and I don't want to bother anybody else who might be sleeping. I am a terrible plane sleeper,
Mm.
so I don't want to have to sneak by anybody and disturb their their flight.
Yeah, that's me exactly. Same strategy, stretching in a corner. Yeah, I don't want to wake anybody up for sure. So if you had a free airline pass and a week with nothing else to do, where would you be headed next?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Hmm. I recently did the Galapagos. I
Mm,
cruised there and it was wonderful. And I really wanted to extend and do Machu Picchu. But it's not as easy as it sounds. And
mm.
so I would love to go back and explore Machu Picchu because it's a place I've always wanted to see and it looks like the trip of a lifetime. So I think that's where I would go right now.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I will trade you life stories. I'll do the Galapagos because I've been to Machu Picchu and it is absolutely fantastic. And I'm dying to see the Galapagos. So,
It's incredible. The Galapagos, it's everything everybody says it is.
man, that's wonderful. So, what is one thing in your carry on that you wouldn't travel without?
Well, I am a carry-on only traveler,
Hmm.
for to start with. I have terrible luck with flights and with people losing my suitcases. So, I have become a, carry-on only traveler. I have a terrific set of noise canceling, earbuds. I also have
Mm,
noise canceling headphones, which, make long haul and short flights much more pleasant. If I'm sleeping, I invested in a mask that I absolutely love, that is a true darkening mask.
mm.
And so those are two things for comfort, especially on those long haul flights.
Yeah, you got a system to block out the world.
Absolutely.
I love it. So, last question. What's one thing you have seen or done on the road that you wish you could go back and experience again with somebody you love?
I was fortunate enough to cruise to Burma.
Mm,
Gosh, it's been a while. Back in the I think it was 2015.
mm,
This was a life-changing experience for me. It really, altered my perception of the world,
mm.
and meeting the people of Burma, seeing the big cities and then the very small towns, learning more about religion and culture there. It was eye-opening, and unfortunately, you can't visit right now.
Yeah.
But that was an experience of a lifetime, and I count my blessings that I was able to do that because it really did open my eyes to the world in a way that, a lot of other travel that I've done hadn't before.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way about Cuba.
Yeah,
Completely eye opening, really hard to do right now.
yeah.
I'm hopeful, just for the sake of people and the world, I'm hopeful that one day all these places are going to be accessible again.
And me
And
too.
yeah, we can share these with lots of people. Colleen, thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you today.
Oh, thanks so much, Brian. This was great.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed that conversation with Colleen McDaniel as much as I did. And hey, I want to let you know, Colleen and I had so much to talk about that I wasn't able to fit the entire interview into the podcast. But don't you fear, you can hear the entire conversation on our YouTube channel. That's right, go to YouTube and search Gather and Go, or simply go to our show notes at grouptravelleader.com/podcast, and you can watch the full interview there. See me and Colleen in living color, and you will hear us discuss some things that weren't included in the audio here, including Colleen's take on some of the real key differences that separate one river cruise line from another. She's also going to share a lot more about the differences between ocean and river cruising that we didn't include here. And she also has a really interesting take on how river cruises facilitate more independent experiences than traditional land tours. So I would encourage you to head on over to YouTube and check that out. You will be glad you did. Now, I want to take a minute and hit some of the highlights of what Colleen had to say to make sure you don't miss some of these key points. When we were talking about the demographics of river cruising, Colleen said, "I think the demographics are changing." She said it does tend to be an older crowd, in part because the cruises are longer and younger people might not have the time to get away. But more and more, we are seeing younger cruisers on board all the ships that are sailing in Europe. Part of that is the pandemic changed how people thought about travel. Another reason is because the internet has gotten a lot better. But for younger people, where getting away from work is really tough, all of a sudden working on a cruise ship is doable. And I think that makes a difference. I love this evolution. It's no surprise that many people find river cruising one of the very best ways to travel, especially to traveling in Europe. And word has gotten out, and it's not just retirees who want to have this travel experience anymore. So I would encourage you, if you have a group of younger travelers and you have never really thought about a river cruise because you just assumed it was for older people, or maybe the Wi-Fi access wasn't good, or maybe the trips are too long, you might be surprised. Maybe give it a go. Maybe talk to some of your travelers. Maybe do some research into these cruise lines. Find what kind of opportunities they have for you. And you might just be able to put together a great river cruise trip that even some of your younger travelers are interested in coming on. Now, when I asked her to explain the differences between the river cruise and the land tour approach to seeing a place like Europe, Colleen said on a river cruise, you only have to unpack once. She said the ship takes you to the destinations versus trains, buses, etc. When you're staying in a hotel for a night or two, repacking and then going on to the next location. She also said on a river cruise, you're never too far from a really cool destination. You're spending a ton of time in port, and you're able to make it the experience you want. Now, I know many of us have been doing land-based tours for a long, long time, and certainly no disrespect to that, but it is hard to argue with this logic of seeing places like Europe from a river cruise. Everybody who has been on a land tour that covers a lot of territory knows that the very worst part of the experience is the constant packing and unpacking, and being in a hotel for one night, maybe 2 nights, and then having to get up early and do it all again. Maybe second to the worst part of it is just the constant time on the motor coach or on the train to get from one place to another. River cruising solves many of those problems. You are cruising while you're asleep, and so you spend most of your waking hours in the destinations you came to see. That's very hard to argue with. And as Colleen and I discussed, the price point is not all that different. So if you're avoiding river cruising because you think it is more expensive than land tours, well, maybe take another look because you might just be able to provide your people the very best kind of travel experience in a place like Europe or another destination by doing it on a river cruise instead of all the hassles that come with bus tours and hotel check-ins and checkouts and suitcase packing and unpacking and all of those things. And finally, when I asked Colleen some pretty straightforward questions about the sustainability of river cruising and how it impacts life for locals, she said, so far, we're seeing that growth can absolutely keep up with demand. She said, we're continuing to see the destination expand. Sure, if you're on the Danube, you're going to do Budapest and Vienna, but we're seeing further expansion into the southern part of the Danube River. And there are always cruise lines adding smaller ports to their itineraries so people can see other parts of the river. Now, this is a trend we see far beyond river cruising. In many places, Europe, but as well as the US, people are finding more and more smaller destinations to go to, places that are out of the way, places that don't get a lot of tourist traffic. And you know what? This is a good thing because it spreads the wealth of tourism dollars. It helps you have a more authentic experience, and it helps keep tourism manageable. So I love this trend. I'm glad to hear that there is still room on the rivers for more vessels, for more growth. And that means that there's room for you and your group as well. Great stuff there from Colleen McDaniel. Well, earlier in the show, we talked about Hawaii raising its tourism tax and making it applicable to a whole new set of people, including cruisers and others. And it got me to wondering whether tourism tax is the best tool for tackling climate issues. We're going to talk about that right now in today's Hot Minute. Yeah, that's right. The Hot Minute is the portion of the program where I take 60 seconds to give you my unfiltered views on issues that impact tourism every day. And today we're going to ask the question, can climate challenges be solved by tourism taxes? So let's put 60 seconds on the clock and get into it. Call me a skeptic, But I don't really believe Hawaii's tourism tax increase is actually about mitigating climate change. Taxing tourists is an age-old strategy for state governments that want to increase revenue without burdening their own tax bases. And since climate change is a fashionable concern among many people these days, citing climate as the rationale for tax hikes makes a convenient fig leaf. A little too convenient, if you ask me. The inconvenient truth in this case is that increasing accommodation tax is unlikely to make any meaningful impact on climate change in Hawaii or anywhere else. What it is certain to do, however, is to make Hawaii an even more expensive place to visit. Now, I'm all for destinations thinking strategically about sustainability. But will this new tax revenue actually be used to make travel to Hawaii more sustainable? I'll believe that when I see it. Well, that's it. That's the Hot Minute. That's how I see things anyway. Of course, as always, you are welcome to disagree with me, and we can still be friends. And hey, whether you agree or disagree, we would love to hear from you. You can send your thoughts, questions, or the reasons you give when asking for a budget increase to podcast@grouptravelleader.com. I read every email that comes into that address. I really enjoy hearing from you. And hey, you never know. Your ideas might just be the topic of the next Hot Minute. And while you're in the mood to give us some feedback, would you do me a big favor? Would you go to your favorite podcast playing app? And if you haven't already subscribed to the show, do that now. While you're there, if you would give us a rating and leave us a review, that would be so helpful. And I am very thankful to everyone who has done that so far. My thanks as well to Colleen McDaniel for joining us today. On the next episode, I'm going to bring you a really fascinating conversation with Greg Fisher of WaveRes. He's going to give us lots of insider info on how tour operators can make the most of online travel agencies. You won't want to miss that. Until then, though, remember this. At the end of the day, we are all on this trip together, so let's make it a good one. See you next time on Gather and Go. Gather and Go is hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Jewell. Our publisher is Mac Lacey. Danya Simmons is our creative director. Ashley Ricks is our circulation manager and graphic designer. Our sales team is Kyle Anderson and Talisa Reck. To advertise on the podcast, call Talisa at 859-253-0455. Gather and Go is a production of the Group Travel Leader. For more information about our magazines, podcasts, and events, visit us online at grouptravelleader.com. This episode was brought to you by Colette. Colette provides industry-leading benefits, including high commissions and low earned tour ratios, to group leaders of all kinds. From banks to families, from religious groups to garden clubs, and more. It doesn't matter where your group has been, it matters where they'll go next. Head to gocollette.com/groups to learn more.